What's going on, everybody? My name is Ben and welcome back to the channel for another episode of our J2M3 Raiden. Now, last week I did not release an episode. I do apologize about that, but it was the Thanksgiving break here in the States, so I took some time away from the regular bench and I worked on a totally different project. I should have a video up for you today or maybe tomorrow talking about that project, but today we're back on the jack. Now, last time we worked on the cockpit, got that all squared away, and we put the fuselage together and the wings on and all of that, so it's looking pretty decent. We're going to go ahead and move forward today with extra parts like the front nose, the canopy, chin air scoop, all of that good stuff. We're going to go ahead and focus on the little odds and ends and get this thing hopefully primed. So today we're going to start off with the front nose. Now, I've gotten everything kind of fixed up and it's ready to go, but I need to go ahead and install the very front nose cap. That includes like a cooling fan, a duct, and then the outer cap as well. So all of that has to be installed. Now, I'm not going to go ahead and worry about anything about the exhausts. Leave those off for now. We'll deal with those later on. But we are going to go ahead and shift over and take care of the drop tank as well. I want to get that all put together. Last thing we have to worry about is that chin air scoop. That shouldn't be too hard to do. It's just one piece, but the fit might be a little wonky. So we're going to check that. By far, though, the hardest thing we're going to have to do today is work on that canopy because there's a couple of issues I've got with the canopy and it's just not going to be very easy. We are given here in the kit a one-piece canopy, which looks great, by the way. It's got very clear transparency, very nice panel lines, and it fits like a dream when you drop it right here onto the Raiden. But the problem is that I put a lot of time and effort into that cockpit. I don't want to be able to see it. So to do that, we went out and we picked up a pack of these Squadron crystal clear canopies for the J2M. I've never really worked with vacu-form canopies before. I don't know much about them, but I do know that they are supposed to be very thin, very clear, and they have a very nice scale effect. So that's great. But looking at this, it looks like a real challenge to go ahead and cut that off to get the pieces separated so you can go ahead and post them open. I do have an extra one though. It comes with two, which is really nice. And yeah, these are very crystal clear and they're very thin vacu-form plastic. So these would really come in handy. I also have another J2M, I think it's a J2M6 that I might be able to use the spare canopy on that as well. But I think what we're going to do instead, this has kind of emboldened me to go ahead and take the kit part and to try to separate those individual pieces. Now that might be completely stupid of me to do. I don't know. This could be a lot easier to do it just here with the vacu-form, but I still want to try it because the kit canopy is very nice and it's got some beautiful detail. So I'm going to try to go ahead and utilize that. Now, I actually built a Raiden probably about 15 to 20 years ago, and I did actually separate the canopy. I used an X-Acto knife and a very sharp blade, and I just kept scoring the area until eventually I scored all the way through it. Ideally, it would be really nice to have a razor saw. That would make this job a lot easier, but unfortunately, it's one of the few tools I do not have. So we're going to have to make do with what we have here on the bench, which of course is going to be an X-Acto knife with a number 11 blade. Now, I could also use a pin vise and just keep scoring it, but those are a little bit wider, and I want a nice clean cut, so I'm going to go ahead and stick with the X-Acto knife. Now, that razor saw has made it onto my Christmas list, so we'll see if one of those comes through, but for right now, we're just going to work with what we have. Now, remember that the last time I tried this, it did work out. I got through the canopy and I did separate them into their different individual pieces, but I ended up cracking the front windscreen. So I don't want to do that with this kit. But in case I do, I've got the vacu-form canopies I can fall back on. Now, we're going to go ahead and, like I said, use an X-Acto knife. We're going to just start scoring the canopy sections away. We'll start probably on the rear of the canopy, get those side panels off first. Then we'll be able to move on to the center section and separate that from the windscreen. So it's going to be challenging. It's going to take some time, but I think it's going to be probably the best I can possibly do with the kit parts. Like I said, if I make a mistake, I can just fall back on the vacu-form canopy and call it a day. So let's go ahead and jump into a time lapse. We're going to cut the canopy apart, get it into its individual pieces, clean them up as best as we can. We'll most likely dip them in future just so that it restores that transparency, and we'll get on those seams, get this thing ready for priming. All right, everybody, we are back, and the jack is coming right along here. Went ahead and I glued on that front cowling area. There's a little bit of a step there, but we should be able to file that down with some jeweler files. Now, we also have to worry about the chin air scoop down there, and it looks like I need to do a little bit of surgery on that to go ahead and get that as flush and tapered as possible. Moving over to the canopy, that thing came apart beautifully. I took a very sharp knife, I scored through each section, took them apart, and then dipped them in Future. Nice thing about Future is it restores that transparency and it gives them the appearance of being even thinner than they already are. I don't know how that works, but for some reason it does. So all these canopies are ready for masking. Not really looking forward to that, but it needs to happen, so we're going to go ahead and get that on this episode as well. But overall, the jack is moving right along, and I think what we're going to do next is I'm going to go ahead and get that canopy glued down. We do have to go ahead and put a little bit of Mr. Surfacer in between the wing roots. It's a little bit of a gap there at the very, very front of that. We also have to put on the aerial as well as that chin intake. So that's not too bad. Hopefully those parts fit on nicely, and I think we'll be really good to go. Now for that chin intake, for some reason, the kit, even with this great fit that it has, there's a little bit of a step between where the wing meets the cowling. If I had realized that, I would have shimmed it, but I didn't realize that at the time. Now, as far as I know, that area is actually nicely tapered, so I want to go ahead and try to restore that as much as I can. We're also going to go ahead and assemble the drop tank, and that's very simple. It's just a right and a left piece. Sandwich those together, throw some glue on it, you're good to go. But moving right along, we're going to go ahead and take some Tamiya Extra Thin. We're just going to go ahead and glue the two halves of the drop tank together. Then after this is cured, we can come back with maybe a jeweler file and file down any sort of seams. Again, I'm really working on trying to get all of my seams to be as flush and as even as possible during the gluing phase, holding it for a little bit longer than I usually do, just to make sure that my seams aren't too prominent. And so far, it's worked beautifully. So now we're going to go ahead and move on though to something that I really don't like, and that is masking canopies. It's one of those necessary evils, and even though I hate it, we're going to go ahead and try our best to make sure this canopy is as cleanly masked as possible. So to do that, we're going to use some Tamiya tape, a ruler, an X-Acto knife, and a lot of patience. Now, you know me, I typically have quite a bit of patience. I can sit down and work on something pretty mundane for hours and hours at a time. But for some reason, masking canopies just annoys me, you know? I don't know if it's just me or if it's a lot of you out there, but masking canopies, one of those things I just don't like doing, but it has to be done. So we're going to go ahead and jump into a time lapse. We're going to get this canopy all nicely masked. I'm going to try to be very careful, work around the perimeter, and then into the inner field of each of those little windows. Once that's done, we can then glue it down to the aircraft, and then we'll come in and we'll airbrush on top of that the interior green color, and then we'll prime over top of that. So let's continue with this aircraft and get everything masked and ready to go. All right, everybody, we are back and we have our J2M3 all nicely primed. I didn't show that because it's a pretty simple process, but I did use the Stalnares gray primer, just like I do for most of my models, and that worked out beautifully. Again, I'm going to say that the seams here on the kit are really manageable. So that makes my job a lot easier. I took a little bit more care to make sure that my seams lined up as best as they could. I still missed a little bit here and there, but I think they're pretty decent. Applying the primer is great. As you can see, I even got the drop tank and everything is nicely primed. The seams are actually quite invisible through most of the area, and I was worried about that. I did use a little bit of Mr. Surfacer there in the wing root to kind of even it out, but honestly, I have had to use very little filler in this kit, so I love it. I think next episode we'll be back and we're going to attempt to go ahead and pre-shade this kit, maybe use some NATO black or something. We'll have to look into that a little bit more carefully, and then we'll be ready for painting. I'm also planning on painting on the national markings as well. There's a red circle, but with a white outline, so that should be kind of interesting to go ahead and to do. But until our next episode, you know the drill. Go out there, get yourself some bench time, have some fun, build something cool, and we'll see you back here on the next episode of the J2M3 Raiden by Hasegawa. Thanks so much, everybody. We'll see you soon.